I didn't think the sentence, "Can you watch the kids for a bit?" would end up quietly detonating my relationship with my family. But looking back now, that was the moment everything started sliding out of place. I'm George, I'm 31, and until recently I honestly believed I was doing what a good son does: showing up, helping out, keeping the peace. That belief lasted right up until the day my mom decided, without asking me, that I was now the permanent solution to my sister's childcare problems. Not helping, not filling in, permanent. And she said it with this smile that told me she'd already made up her mind. It started small, which is probably why I didn't push back hard enough at first. A Tuesday afternoon call from my mom while I was in the middle of answering emails for my remote job. She didn't even ask how I was. She just said, "Your sister's overwhelmed. I told her you'd take the kids after school this week." I remember pausing, staring at my laptop, waiting for the rest of the sentence, some explanation, some discussion, something that implied I had a choice. Nothing came. When I said I had work, she laughed, actually laughed, and said, "You're at home anyway. It's not like you're doing anything important." That should have been the first red flag, but I swallowed it. I always do. I've always been the flexible one in the family, the one without real commitments in their eyes. I don't have kids. I'm not married. I don't own a house yet. So somehow that translated, over the years, into me being endlessly available. I told myself it was just for a few days. Temporary. That was the word my mom kept using, like a soothing lullaby. Just temporary, George. Your sister just needs help getting back on her feet. My sister, Lena, is 2 years older than me and has 3 kids under 10. She also has a long history of things just happening to her. Jobs fall through. Babysitters quit. Plans change last minute. Somehow, all of it always lands at someone else's feet, and more often than not, that someone is me. When I showed up that first afternoon, her kids ran past me like a small herd, shoes half on, backpacks open, crumbs already falling onto the floor. Lena barely looked up from her phone. She said, "They've already eaten. Homework's in their bags. Bedtime's at 9, like she was handing me a checklist I'd asked for. I stayed until 9:30 that night, then 10 the next. Then suddenly I was picking them up every weekday. Then weekends started creeping in, framed as emergencies. Just for a few hours. Just this once. I rearranged my work schedule, skipped social plans, started waking up earlier to make up for lost time. Every time I hinted that this was becoming a lot, my mom stepped in fast, cutting me off before I could finish a sentence. "Families help each other," she'd say, sharp and final. "And you don't have real responsibilities yet, so this is how you contribute." That line hit harder than I expected. I remember standing in my mom's kitchen when she said it, the kids arguing loudly in the living room, the smell of reheated food hanging in the air. "You don't have real responsibilities." She said it like it was a fact, not an opinion. Like my job, my time, my life existed in some lower category that could be rearranged whenever it was convenient. I tried to explain that working from home didn't mean I was free all day. She waved her hand at me. "You sit at a computer. Your sister is raising children. That's real life." From that point on, the tone shifted. It wasn't gratitude anymore. It was expectation. If I showed up 5 minutes late, Lena would sigh loudly and say she was already late for something. If I said I couldn't stay past a certain time, my mom would step in later with a disappointed call about how stressed Lena was and how I'd let everyone down. No one asked if I was tired. No one asked how my work was going. It was like I'd been quietly reassigned a role, and everyone else had agreed without me. What really got to me wasn't even the babysitting itself. It was the way it erased me. Conversations stopped including me unless they were about logistics. Family dinners turned into planning meetings about who needed help next week. If I mentioned anything about my own plans, the room would go quiet for a second before my mom redirected the conversation back to the kids. I started feeling like a background character in my own family, useful but interchangeable. The first time I said no outright, it was a Sunday evening. Lena texted asking if I could take the kids the next morning because her regular sitter fell through. I stared at my phone for a long time before typing back that I couldn't. I had an important meeting. I hit send and immediately felt that familiar twist of guilt, like I'd just done something wrong. The response came 10 minutes later, not from Lena, but from my mom. "I don't understand why you're being difficult. This is just temporary. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That was when something in me shifted. Not snapped. Shifted. Quietly. I realized temporary had no end date. I realized my boundaries were invisible to them because they'd never needed to see them before. I started paying attention after that. The way plans were made without me. The way my time was spoken about like a shared resource. The way my mom would praise Lena for holding it together while ignoring the fact that I was the one making that possible. So I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. I stopped trying to be understood. I just stopped showing up. No announcement. No confrontation. On Monday, I didn't go. I stayed home and worked. On Tuesday, I didn't answer my phone. On Wednesday, I went out for a long walk during the hours I'd usually be watching the kids. Each day I waited for someone to ask me what was going on. No one did at first. Then the messages started coming in. Confused at first. Then irritated. Then anxious. Lena's texts got shorter. My mom's calls got more frequent. By Friday, my phone was lighting up nonstop. Missed calls. Voicemails. Group messages where my name was mentioned over and over like I'd vanished into thin air. I listened to one voicemail from my mom late that night. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way it gets when she's trying not to sound upset. She said, "We need to talk. This isn't okay. Your sister is in a bind, and we don't understand why you're doing this." I sat there in the dark, phone in my hand, heart beating faster than it had all week. For the first time, it wasn't me panicking. It was them. And as I stared at the screen, watching another call come in that I didn't answer, I realized this wasn't just about babysitting anymore. Something bigger was about to surface, something that had been sitting under all of this for years, waiting for the moment when I finally stopped being convenient. By the following Monday, the silence had turned into something sharper. Not quiet anymore, pressurized. The kind that feels like it's waiting to burst. I hadn't blocked anyone. I wanted to see what they'd say when they realized I wasn't going to fold immediately. That was probably my mistake, because it gave them room to escalate. It started with my mom showing up at my apartment unannounced. I heard the knock through my headphones while I was on a call, that heavy, insistent rhythm she uses when she's already decided she's in the right. I muted myself, waited, hoping she'd leave. She didn't. When I finally opened the door, she walked past me like she owned the place, purse still on her shoulder, eyes already scanning the room. "So this is what you've been doing," she said, gesturing vaguely at my desk. "Ignoring your family." I told her calmly that I'd told Lena I couldn't babysit anymore, that I had work, that I needed boundaries. She didn't sit down. She didn't ask questions. She just crossed her arms and sighed like I was a teenager who hadn't cleaned his room. "You didn't tell us you were done," she said. "You just disappeared. Do you know what position you put your sister in?" I said, "The same position I've been in for months." That's when her face changed. Not angry, dismissive. "This again," she said. "George, you're making this into something it's not. Lena has 3 children. You have a laptop." I felt something tighten in my chest. I tried again, slower this time. I explained the missed meetings, the stress, the way I felt like my life had been put on hold without my consent. She waved me off halfway through. "Everyone makes sacrifices," she said. "But you're the only one making this dramatic." Before I could respond, her phone rang. "Lena." She answered immediately, put her on speaker without asking me. Lena's voice came through strained and irritated. "Mom, where are you?" I had to leave work early again. "My boss is not happy. George was supposed to be there." I said, "I never said I'd be there." Lena scoffed. "You always are. You know how this works." That sentence landed harder than any insult. "You know how this works." Like it was a system. Like my role had been decided years ago. I looked at my mom, waiting, hoping, for her to correct that assumption. She didn't. She just nodded slightly, like Lena couldn't see her, but I could. "This isn't working," my mom said finally. "We need a solution." I said, "The solution is you hire a babysitter. Or Lena adjusts her schedule. I'm not available anymore." There was a pause. Then my mom said something that made my stomach drop. "Then we'll have to rethink some things." I asked her what she meant. She didn't answer right away. She just pursed her lips, like she was choosing her words carefully. "Your father and I have been helping you out," she said. "More than you realize." That was new. "Helping me how?" I asked. She glanced around my apartment again. "Your rent," she said. "The reason it's so reasonable is because your aunt owns the building." We talked her into keeping it low. As a favor. Family favors go both ways. I stared at her. I'd lived there for 3 years. No one had ever mentioned this. Not once. "You never told me that," I said. "We didn't think we needed to," she replied. "Because you were being helpful. Until now." The call with Lena was still connected. I could hear her breathing on the other end. "So what?" Lena said. "He just gets to walk away, and we're supposed to scramble?" My mom said, "No. He just needs a reminder of how things actually work." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about babysitting. It never was. It was about leverage. I asked my mom directly, "Are you threatening me?" She looked genuinely offended. "Don't be so dramatic," she said. "I'm saying that if you stop acting like part of this family, you can't expect family support." I felt embarrassed, then angry, then something colder underneath. "So all of this," I said slowly, "was conditional." She shrugged. "Everything is conditional." After she left, I sat on my couch for a long time, replaying the conversation. The realization settled in slowly and painfully. They didn't see my help as generosity. They saw it as obligation, something owed. And now that I was trying to step out of line, they were reminding me who held the power. The next few days were relentless. Lena started posting vague things online about fake support systems and people who disappear when you need them most. Family group chats lit up with passive-aggressive messages about pulling together and showing up. My dad, who had stayed silent until then, finally called me. His voice was tired, but firm. "You need to fix this," he said. "Your mother is very upset." I asked him if he thought what they were doing was fair. He didn't answer that. He just said, "Lena's kids are suffering." That was always the shield. The kids. As if I was hurting them personally by reclaiming my time. I started doubting myself again, just for a moment. Then something happened that erased that doubt completely. On Friday afternoon, I got an email from my landlord. It was polite but formal. It said that due to changing circumstances, my lease would not be renewed at the end of the term. 60 days notice. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. Then I noticed the CC line. My mom. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring. I asked her why she was copied on an email about my housing. There was a pause. Then she said, calmly, "We needed to protect Lena. You left us no choice." That was it. That was the moment. The ground shifted under everything I thought I knew about my family. They hadn't just guilted me. They hadn't just dismissed me. They had gone behind my back and pulled a lever they knew would hurt me. All because I stopped being useful. I hung up without another word. I sat there staring at the email, my heart racing, a strange mix of betrayal and clarity washing over me. This wasn't an argument anymore. This was a line crossed. And as I sat in that quiet apartment, surrounded by boxes I hadn't packed yet, one thought kept repeating in my head, steady and unmistakable. The first thing I felt after the anger faded wasn't resolve or determination. It was exhaustion, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes even simple decisions feel heavy. I wish I could say I immediately sprang into action, that I saw the betrayal clearly and turned it into fuel right away. I didn't. I shut down for a while. I kept going through the motions at work, answering emails, sitting in meetings, but everything felt slightly out of focus, like I was watching my own life from a few feet away. The apartment didn't feel like mine anymore after that email. Every wall felt temporary. Every sound from the hallway made my stomach tighten, like someone was about to knock again and tell me time was up. 60 days sounds like a lot until you realize how quickly they disappear when you're mentally paralyzed. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not friends. Not coworkers. There was a part of me that still felt embarrassed, like I'd failed some unspoken test of adulthood by letting my parents have that much control over my life. The family messages didn't stop. If anything, they shifted tone. Now there was concern layered over the pressure. My mom left voicemails saying things like, "We're worried about you," and "You don't seem like yourself lately." Lena sent a message that said, "I hope you're happy. The kids keep asking where you went." That one hurt more than I expected. Not because it was fair, but because it was effective. It painted me as the villain without acknowledging anything that led up to it. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't either reopen the wound or make me sound defensive. Instead, I focused on getting through each day. Some mornings I woke up with that familiar tightness in my chest, the feeling that something bad was about to happen even though nothing was actively happening at all. Other mornings I felt strangely numb, like my body had decided to conserve energy by shutting down unnecessary emotions. The lowest point came about 2 weeks after the lease notice. I was sitting at my kitchen table late at night, surrounded by open tabs on my laptop. Apartment listings, budget spreadsheets, emails I hadn't answered. I realized I was doing the math over and over, hoping the numbers would change if I stared long enough. They didn't. Rent everywhere else was higher. Moving would cost money I hadn't planned to spend. And underneath all of it was the quiet realization that if I hadn't stopped babysitting, none of this would be happening. That thought scared me. Not because it made me want to go back, but because it showed me how deep their leverage had gone. They'd built a system where my comfort depended on my compliance, and I hadn't even noticed. Sitting there in that silence, I finally let myself feel the grief of it. Not just the housing situation, but the loss of the family I thought I had. The idea that support was mutual. The belief that my worth wasn't tied to what I could provide. I didn't cry dramatically. It was quieter than that. Just a few minutes of staring at the wall, breathing slowly, letting the truth settle. When I stood up from the table, something had shifted again. Not in a triumphant way, in a practical one. The next morning, I told my manager what was going on. Not the family drama in detail, just that I was dealing with a housing issue and might need some flexibility. To my surprise, he was immediately supportive. He asked if I wanted to temporarily adjust my hours. He reminded me that my work had been solid and that this didn't change that. It was such a small interaction, but it felt like oxygen. Proof that not every authority figure used care as a bargaining chip. I started telling a few friends too. Carefully at first, like I was testing the water. Every single one reacted the same way. Disbelief, followed by anger on my behalf. One of them helped me tour apartments. Another offered to store some boxes if I needed it. No conditions. No guilt. Just help. It was jarring to realize how different support could feel when it wasn't wrapped in expectation. I threw myself into work more intentionally after that, not as an escape, but as a way to anchor myself. I took on a project I'd been putting off. I volunteered for a task that would normally have gone to someone else. Not because I had to prove anything, but because it felt good to choose where my energy went. Slowly, my confidence started to rebuild, not in a loud way, but in the quiet reassurance that I was capable of handling things on my own. Meanwhile, my family's behavior grew more erratic. My mom oscillated between icy silence and sudden warmth. One day she'd text, "We miss you. Dinner this week." The next she'd send something clipped and formal about next steps if I didn't reconsider helping Lena. My dad tried a different angle. He called and talked about unrelated things, like the weather or a neighbor's new car, as if pretending nothing was wrong would somehow reset everything. I listened politely but didn't engage. Every time the conversation drifted toward Lena or the kids, I steered it back or ended the call. The thing that surprised me most during that period was how much lighter my days felt without the babysitting, even with all the stress layered on top. I had evenings again. Quiet ones. I cooked meals without rushing. I read before bed. I took walks just to clear my head. The guilt would creep in sometimes, usually late at night, but it didn't stay as long as it used to. I started to see it for what it was, conditioning. About a month in, I found a smaller apartment across town. It wasn't perfect. Older building. Less space. But it was mine, fully mine, with no invisible strings attached. When I signed the lease, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. Not excitement. Relief. Like I was finally standing on solid ground, even if it wasn't as polished as before. I didn't tell my family right away. Part of me wanted to keep that win to myself. When my mom eventually found out through my aunt, she called immediately. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice tight again. I said, "Because I didn't need permission this time." There was a long pause after that. She didn't apologize. She didn't argue. She just said, "This isn't how families work," and hung up. I started to understand then that my growth wasn't just inconvenient to them. It was threatening. The more stable I became on my own, the less leverage they had. The more confident I felt, the harder it would be to pull me back into the role they designed for me. And Lena noticed it too. Her messages changed. Less accusatory, more probing. She asked where I'd moved. If I was doing okay financially. Once, she even said, "Mom's really stressed. You know how she gets." I read that message several times before putting my phone down. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix anything. By the end of that month, I wasn't healed. I wasn't past it. But I was different. Stronger in a way that didn't require approval. Clearer about what I would and wouldn't accept. I'd lost my old apartment, but I'd gained something more valuable, perspective. What I didn't know yet was that my family wasn't done reacting to that change. They were just regrouping. And the moment they realized I wasn't coming back quietly, they started making plans of their own. I didn't wake up one morning thinking, I'm going to get revenge. It was quieter than that, more deliberate. The urge didn't come from anger anymore. It came from clarity. Once the emotional fog lifted, I started seeing patterns I'd ignored for years. And when you see patterns clearly, you also start seeing pressure points. The first thing I did was nothing. On purpose. I stayed polite but distant. I responded to messages hours later instead of immediately. I declined invitations without explaining myself. I stopped volunteering information. That alone seemed to unsettle them more than any argument ever had. My mom, especially, didn't know how to react to calm indifference. She kept trying different tones, like cycling through tools in a drawer, hoping one would still work. One week, she tried nostalgia. She sent photos from when we were kids, captioned with things like, "Remember when you used to love coming over?" Another week, she tried concern. "You seem withdrawn. I hope you're taking care of yourself." And then, when neither worked, she went back to control, subtle at first, then less so. That was when I started paying closer attention. I realized something important during one of those half-awkward phone calls with my dad. He mentioned, offhandedly, that Lena was having trouble keeping her job. Again, that her boss had warned her about attendance issues. He said it like it was unfortunate, but unavoidable, like weather. I asked a few neutral questions, nothing suspicious. How long had this been going on? What kind of schedule did she have now? He answered without thinking too much about it. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the wall, connecting dots. The babysitting wasn't just convenient for them. It was essential. They'd built their entire routine around my availability. Without me, things didn't just get harder. They started falling apart. I didn't feel smug about that. I felt cautious. Because if there's one thing I knew about my family, it was that they didn't handle loss of control gracefully. They would escalate again. The only question was how. So I started documenting things. Not dramatically, just quietly. Screenshots of texts where expectations were stated as facts. Voicemails where guilt was layered on thick. The email with my mom CC'd on my lease termination. Dates. Times. Patterns. I didn't even know exactly what I'd need it for yet. I just knew I didn't want to be caught unprepared again. At the same time, I strengthened the parts of my life that had nothing to do with them. I leaned further into work, not by burning myself out, but by being strategic. I had a conversation with my manager about growth opportunities. He mentioned a leadership track that required a bit more responsibility, but came with flexibility and better pay. I said I was interested. I meant it. I also talked to my aunt, the one who owned my old building. Not to confront her, just to understand. We met for coffee. She looked uncomfortable the entire time, stirring her drink too much, avoiding eye contact. When I asked her directly if my parents had asked her to not renew my lease, she hesitated, then nodded. "They said it was for the family," she said quietly. "That you were being difficult, and this might help reset things." I thanked her for being honest. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. But as I walked home afterward, something crystallized in my mind. They hadn't just crossed a line emotionally. They'd involved other people. They'd used reputation and pressure to box me in. That changed the scale of things. Around this time, Lena started reaching out more directly. Not about babysitting, at least not explicitly. She'd ask how I was adjusting. If the new place was okay. If work was still flexible. The questions were careful, like she was feeling out how much ground she'd lost. I answered politely, but vaguely. Yes, the place was fine. Work was going well. Busy. One evening, she called instead of texting. That alone was unusual. She sounded tired. Not angry, just worn down. She told me she was overwhelmed. That mom was constantly on her case now. That things had been easier when I was around. There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. Just nostalgia for the convenience I provided. "I don't know how you do it," she said. "Just living your life without all this chaos." I almost laughed at that. Almost. Instead, I said something non-committal and let the silence stretch. She filled it, of course. She always did. She talked about the kids. About money. About how mom had offered to help more, but was stressed. Every sentence was a hook, cast in my direction. After the call, I didn't feel tempted. I felt informed. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. My mom invited me to a family dinner, framed as a peace offering. "No pressure," she said. "We just want to reconnect." I hesitated, then agreed. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted to observe them in their natural environment now that I wasn't playing my old role. The dinner was tense, but civil. Too civil. Everyone was on their best behavior. Compliments felt rehearsed. Questions felt loaded. My mom kept watching me like she was waiting for me to slip and reassure her everything was back to normal. I didn't. Halfway through the meal, Lena mentioned, casually, that she might need help again in the future. Not now, just eventually. My mom jumped in immediately, saying, "Families adapt. We'll figure something out." I nodded, said nothing, and kept eating. The silence that followed was thick. They weren't used to it not being filled with my compliance. After dinner, as I was leaving, my mom pulled me aside. She lowered her voice and said, "You know, if you ever want things to go back to how they were, we can talk." I looked at her and realized something important. She thought this was a standoff, that eventually I'd get tired of holding my ground and come back to the table on her terms. She didn't understand that I wasn't trying to go back at all. That night, I made a decision. Not to lash out, not to confront them publicly, but to let the consequences of their own choices unfold without interference. I stopped shielding Lena from the fallout of her schedule. I stopped smoothing things over with extended family. When people asked why I wasn't around as much, I told the truth, calmly and briefly. No embellishment, no drama, just facts. The story changed depending on who heard it, but the core stayed the same. I was setting boundaries. I'd been punished for it. I was moving on, and people listened. I noticed subtle shifts, fewer assumptions, more questions directed at my parents instead of me. My mom hated that. She started calling more frequently again, trying to get ahead of narratives. I let them go to voicemail. By then, I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient. I knew something was coming. Pressure like that doesn't just disappear, it looks for a new outlet. And when it finds one, it tends to expose everything that was hidden underneath. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived with a phone call on a Wednesday afternoon while I was in the middle of work. I almost didn't answer it. The number was Lena's, and by then I'd learned that nothing good followed those calls. But something told me to pick up. She didn't start with small talk. She sounded panicked. Not frustrated, not annoyed, panicked. She told me she'd been fired that morning. Attendance issues, final warning ignored, no more chances. She said Mom was at her house crying, that Dad was trying to figure something out. And then she said the sentence that finally confirmed everything I'd suspected. "They're saying this is your fault." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch. Lena filled it, like she always did, explaining how if I'd just helped a little longer, how if I hadn't made things difficult, none of this would have happened. She said Mom had told her I was being selfish, that I'd abandoned the family when they needed me most. When she finally stopped talking, I said calmly, "You lost your job because you missed work. I didn't fire you." She got quiet, then defensive, then angry, and then, almost without realizing it, she said something she hadn't meant to say out loud. "Mom said if you'd just cooperate again, she could fix things. She said she'd help you with rent next time. Or whatever." That was it. The confirmation I needed. Even now, after everything, they still thought leverage was the answer. That my independence was temporary. That if they applied enough pressure, I'd step back into place. I thanked Lena for telling me and ended the call. That evening, I made 3 phone calls of my own. The first was to my manager. I accepted the leadership role he'd mentioned weeks earlier. The raise went into effect immediately. The second was to my aunt. I told her I wasn't angry with her, but I made it clear I wouldn't be participating in any more family interventions. I told her the truth of what had happened. She was quiet for a long time. Then she apologized. Not defensively, genuinely. The third call was the hardest. It was to my parents. I asked them to meet me in public. Neutral ground. A cafe near my new place. They arrived together, tense but confident, like they still believed this conversation would end in me folding. My mom started first, saying she was worried about Lena, about the kids, about how everything had spiraled since I stepped back. I let her finish. Then I took out my phone. I told them I knew about the lease, about the conversations behind my back, about the idea that help in our family came with strings attached. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid out the facts, one by one, like items on a table. My mom tried to interrupt. I held up my hand and kept going. I told them I was done being managed, done being volunteered, done being punished for setting boundaries. I told them I had documentation of everything, not because I wanted to use it, but because I wanted them to understand I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't misremembering. I saw the system clearly now. My dad looked down at the table. My mom went very still. Then I said the sentence that shifted the power permanently. I will not be helping Lena. Not now. Not later. And if you try to pressure me again, I will stop engaging entirely. My mom laughed, short and sharp. You can't just walk away from your family. I said, I already did. You just didn't notice until it affected you. There was nothing dramatic after that. No yelling. No tears. Just the slow realization settling over them that the old levers no longer worked. That the threats were empty. That the consequences were theirs now. The fallout came fast. Without me as a buffer, my parents had to step in fully. Childcare costs piled up. My mom started canceling her own plans. My dad took time off work. The extended family, now aware of what had actually happened, stopped offering sympathy and started asking uncomfortable questions. Why hadn't Lena arranged proper childcare? Why had I been expected to handle it for free? Why had housing been used as punishment? The narrative flipped, quietly, but decisively. A few weeks later, my mom called again. Her voice was tired. Not controlling, just tired. She said, "We didn't think you'd actually leave." I said, "That's the problem." Lena never apologized. Not directly. She sent a message months later saying she hoped we could move past things. I didn't respond. Some doors don't need to be slammed to stay closed. My life stabilized in ways I hadn't expected. Work flourished. I slept better. I made plans without checking anyone else's schedule first. The guilt faded, replaced by something steadier, self-respect. I still think about the kids sometimes. I hope they're okay. But I no longer confuse responsibility with sacrifice. And I no longer believe love should cost me my autonomy. The last time my mom brought up family duty, I told her the truth. I didn't stop showing up because I don't care. I stopped because I finally do. And for the first time, I meant it. I was 17 the first time I realized something didn't add up, but it would take nearly a decade and one unforgettable holiday dinner to find out just how deep the betrayal went. My name's Elias, and if you knew me growing up, you'd probably say I was the quiet kid in a loud house. Not shy, just the kind of person who thinks twice before speaking once. Maybe that's why it took me so long to piece everything together. Why I ignored the signs, the missing details, the gut feelings. Or maybe I just didn't want to believe my own parents could do what they did. I grew up in a modest home in upstate New York, in a house with peeling siding and a crooked mailbox that my dad swore he'd fix every summer. It was me, my older brother Jacob, and our parents, Carl and Mary Ann. From the outside, we probably looked like your average middle-class family, the kind where dad grumbles about the thermostat and mom uses expired coupons with a wink at the cashier. But under the surface, things were off. Always had been. Carl wasn't what you'd call emotionally available. He played the part when needed, at parent-teacher meetings or church fundraisers. But at home, he was cold, distant, and controlling. Mary Ann was harder to pin down. Sometimes overly affectionate, other times passive-aggressive in a way that made your stomach twist. And Jacob could do no wrong. If I got a B+ in math, I was slacking off. If Jacob failed a test, the teacher must have been terrible. That kind of thing. I started working young, 12, to be exact. Not legally, of course. But Mr. Grayson, the owner of a landscaping business down the road, paid me under the table to weed gardens and rake leaves in the fall. He was kind, always made sure I had water in the summer heat, and told me I was the hardest working kid he'd met. At 13, I helped him install fences and clean gutters. By 14, I was clearing snow in the early mornings before school. He even gave me a small Christmas bonus one year, a $100 check in a little envelope that said, "To Elias, for a job well done." I was so proud. I handed it to my mom like I was offering a golden trophy. She smiled, said she'd take care of it, and that was the end of it. Back then, I didn't have a bank account. I didn't even know I was allowed to have one. Every time I got a check, I'd hand it to my parents. "We'll cash it and put it in savings," they'd say. "You'll thank us when you're older." And I believed them. Because when you're a kid, especially one conditioned to keep your head down and not ask too many questions, you take people at their word. You think your parents are looking out for you. You think they have your best interests at heart. That Christmas, I told Jacob about the bonus. He laughed and said something like, "Must be nice getting paid to rake leaves. I'm still waiting for Dad to let me use the car." That was typical Jacob, casually dismissive, always shifting the spotlight. He never worked during high school, not even summer jobs. Said he was focused on sports. even though he warmed the bench for most of his senior year on the JV team. My parents worshipped the ground he walked on. When he got into a state college, they practically threw a parade. When I got into a decent community college with a scholarship, they barely looked up from the TV. But I didn't resent it. Not yet. I just thought, that's how families work sometimes. I kept working for Mr. Grayson through high school. The jobs got more demanding, hauling mulch, trimming trees, even driving his old pickup when he needed me to pick up supplies. He started paying me more, and the checks kept coming. So did my parents' reminders. We're putting it away for you. You'll use it for college. Don't spend it all on video games. And again, I believed them. The first real crack in the facade came when I was 17. It was summer, and I just finished a big backyard renovation with Mr. Grayson. 3 weeks of back-breaking work in the sun. He handed me a check for $1,500 and patted me on the shoulder. You earned every cent, Elias, he said. Take your girl out somewhere nice. Or save it for school. Either way, you deserve it. I was buzzing. I remember thinking I might finally have enough for a used car. When I got home, I showed the check to my mom. She looked it over, didn't smile, just nodded and said, I'll take care of it. Something about the way she said it made me pause. But I didn't say anything. A few days later, I asked about it. Did the check go through? I said, trying to sound casual. Of course, she replied, not even looking up from her crossword. We deposited it. I asked which account. She shot me a look. Our joint savings. The one we set up for you. And that was that. But that same week, I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to. Jacob was in the kitchen, complaining about needing gas money. I was in the hallway, around the corner. Marion told him, I just used Elias's landscaping check to pay the phone bill and groceries. Tell him to stop being so lazy and get a better job if he wants spending money. That word, lazy, hit me like a slap. I worked 6 days a week that summer. Got up before sunrise. Skipped hanging out with friends just to make some extra cash. And here she was, calling me lazy while using my money to keep the lights on. I didn't confront her. Not right away. I just swallowed it. Again, told myself I must have misheard. But things kept piling up. That fall, I applied for a debit card. The bank said I didn't have a personal account on file. When I asked my parents, they brushed it off. It's all under our name for now. You're still a minor. It's safer this way. Except I wasn't. I'd turned 17 that August. Then came the rumors. Little whispers from extended family at gatherings. Elias still isn't working? One uncle asked over Thanksgiving dinner. I blinked. I work almost full-time, I replied. He frowned. That's not what your mom said. And just like that, the seed was planted. I started paying attention, listening more carefully. I caught my parents saying things like, he refuses to get a job, or we offered to help him, but he just lazes around. I'd come home sore, sunburned, hands covered in calluses, and still, they painted me as a freeloader. My brother chimed in too. Elias just doesn't have the same drive I do, he said once while playing video games on the couch I bought. I wanted to scream. Instead, I went back to work. Back to saving. Back to pretending I didn't notice the quiet theft happening right under my nose. By the time I graduated high school, I'd earned over $10,000 in checks. I'd seen none of it. And that was just the beginning. Because years later, long after I left that house, built a life for myself, and thought I'd buried the past, something happened. At a holiday dinner, one of those forced come-home-for-Christmas deals, I saw someone walk in the front door who wasn't supposed to be there. And he didn't come empty-handed. He brought the truth. Every check, every dollar, every lie. I didn't go home much after I turned 18. It wasn't a big, dramatic falling out, at least not at first. Just a slow unraveling. Like realizing the blanket that's kept you warm your whole life is full of holes. You still try to use it, still pretend it works, until one day you're shivering and admit it never really did the job. That's how it was with my parents. I stopped expecting warmth. Stopped expecting honesty. But part of me still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd been wrong. That they'd apologize. That there was a misunderstanding. That if I worked hard enough, I'd earn their respect. Their love. Something. I moved out the summer after high school. My scholarship covered most of my tuition, and I worked part-time at a campus maintenance job. It wasn't glamorous, scrubbing bathroom floors, changing light bulbs, shoveling snow, but it was honest. I didn't tell my parents where I lived for the first few months. Just said I was fine. School was good. Work was busy. They didn't press. I think they liked it better that way. Less chance I'd ask for money they'd already spent. Jacob, meanwhile, flunked out of his first year at college, lost his academic standing, and moved back home like a boomerang with no shame. My parents acted like nothing happened. Marianne even threw him a welcome home barbecue and posted pictures on Facebook with captions like, "So proud of our brilliant boy." The same week, I called to let her know I'd made the dean's list. She said, "That's nice. Have you thought about transferring to a real university? There's something uniquely painful about doing everything right and still feeling like the family disappointment." A few months later, I came home for Thanksgiving. I brought a girl I was dating, Claire, and told myself this year would be different. I wasn't a kid anymore. I had boundaries. I could leave if things got bad. But the second we stepped inside, I felt it, the shift in air, the stiffness in Marianne's hug, the tight smile from Carl. Jacob looked me up and down and said, "You still wearing clearance rack shoes?" Claire blinked, confused. I laughed it off. But that was just the beginning. They barely asked Claire any questions, just smiled politely and redirected the conversation every time she spoke. Marianne made a point of telling a story about Jacob rescuing a neighbor's dog, turning it into some hero narrative about his natural leadership. Jacob jumped in, exaggerating every detail like he was auditioning for a Netflix biopic. I said I'd started tutoring at the campus writing center. Marianne said, "That's good. Maybe it'll finally teach you how to express yourself better." Carl nodded. "Just don't waste too much time helping other people. You need to focus on fixing your own messes first." I didn't know what that meant, but it stung. Claire squeezed my hand under the table. She saw it. All of it. Later that night, she told me she didn't understand how I stayed so calm. I said I'd gotten used to it. That was a lie. You never really get used to that kind of treatment. You just learn to compartmentalize. Shove it into a corner of your brain labeled, "Ignore for now." But the real breaking point, the moment everything snapped, came a year later. I was 20, still in school, working 2 jobs, and just scraping by. My laptop died during finals week. I called my mom, not to ask for help, but to vent. She interrupted me mid-sentence and said, "Well, maybe if you had a real job instead of wasting time on essays, you wouldn't be so broke." I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I started looking through old emails. I remembered Mr. Grayson once said he'd emailed me a tax form years ago when I was underage. I found it. Attached to it was a PDF, a list of payments from his business to Elias W., spread out over 4 years. Over $15,000. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. I did the math in my head, then again on paper. Then I checked my own bank records. Nothing matched. Not a single deposit. I felt sick. Not metaphorically. I actually ran to the bathroom and threw up. They didn't save it. They never saved it. They spent it. And the worst part? They'd spent years telling everyone I refused to work, that I was lazy, that they supported me through school out of the kindness of their hearts. The next day, I emailed Mr. Grayson, told him I was doing well, and thanked him for everything he taught me. I didn't mention the checks, not yet. But he responded warmly, told me he still bragged about the kid who used to carry mulch like a grown man. He said he was retiring soon, but still had all his records, in case the IRS ever comes knocking. That stuck with me. I spent the next few months gathering things. Tax documents, emails, photos, even old text messages from my mom about putting away your check. It was like constructing a timeline of betrayal. Every piece a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that the hurt was real, that they really had done this to me. I didn't know what to do with it yet, but I knew I wasn't going to keep pretending everything was fine. Then, in December, Jacob posted something on Facebook that made my blood boil. It was a photo of a new car, brand new. A black sedan with a red bow on the hood. The caption read, "Early Christmas gift from the best parents in the world. Love you, Mom and Dad." I stared at it for 10 full minutes. $15,000. I thought about the moldy basement I lived in, the laptop I had to borrow, the meals I skipped. And there he was, posing like he earned any of it. That was it. The last thread snapped. I didn't go home that Christmas. I didn't even call. I told Claire everything. Every disgusting detail. She sat with me in silence, then said, "You have to confront them." I shook my head. They'll lie. They'll gaslight. They'll twist it back on me. And they would have, if it was just me. But the universe has a funny way of delivering justice when you least expect it. 2 weeks before New Year's, I got a call from Mr. Grayson. He sounded older, a little winded, but still sharp. "I've been cleaning out my files," he said. "Found something you might want." He'd printed every check he ever wrote me. Made copies. Logged them. Not just the amounts and dates, but who signed them on deposit. "I always had a feeling something was off," he said. "Never saw you with new shoes. Never heard you talk about spending any of it. Figured I'd hang on to these, just in case." He mailed them to me. And when I opened that envelope, I swear my hands shook worse than the day I found that email. Because on nearly every check deposit, the signature didn't say Elias. It said Marianne Whitaker, my mother. That was the proof. Right there. Undeniable. Irrefutable. Not just hearsay, not just my word against theirs. Legal documents. Bank records. Fraud. It felt like a weight pressed against my chest, but in a good way. Like standing up after years of being pushed down. I didn't tell them I had the files. Not yet. I waited. And then, on New Year's Eve, I got a group text from Marianne. "Family dinner at 6 on Saturday. Be there. Don't make it weird." Claire looked over my shoulder. "Are we going?" I nodded. And I brought the envelope with me. Sealed. Tucked inside my coat. But I never had to open it. Because someone else did it for me. At exactly 6:27 p.m., the front door creaked open and in walked a familiar figure. A little older, a little grayer, but unmistakable, Mr. Grayson. And when he looked across the table at my parents, he didn't smile. He said, "I figured it was time Elias got to hear the truth from someone who saw everything." The table went dead quiet. Marianne's fork froze midair. Jacob actually flinched. Carl sat back in his chair like someone had pressed pause on him. For a second, nobody moved. It was one of those silences that stretches and stretches until the air itself feels like it's going to rip in half. Mr. Grayson stood just inside the doorway, snow still clinging to his boots. His coat was damp, probably from melting flakes on the way in, but he didn't take it off. Didn't sit. He just stared at my parents, then glanced at me with something like regret and quiet determination. Marianne was the first to speak. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight and polite, like she was trying to host a dinner party while stomaching food poisoning. Mr. Grayson didn't flinch. "I figured Elias deserved to know what really happened to the money he worked for all those years." I looked across the table, heart hammering. Claire reached under the table and squeezed my hand once. Jacob's smug face was frozen in a strange half-smile, half-grimace. He looked uncomfortable, like someone just turned on a spotlight, and he wasn't ready for it. Carl leaned forward slowly. "This isn't the time," he said in a low, warning tone. Mr. Grayson's eyes narrowed. "No? Seems like the perfect time to me." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn, yellow envelope. I didn't even know he had made a second copy. I thought I had the only one. He handed it to me across the table. "Everything's in there," he said. "Copies of every check I wrote. Who signed them? Where they were deposited. There's even a few bank routing numbers. You can take it to any lawyer, and they'll tell you exactly what it means." Marianne's voice cracked. "Elias, don't open that. We can explain." But I already had. My fingers worked before my brain did, tearing the flap open and pulling out the first sheet. A photocopy of a check dated July 12, 20XX. $850. Signed to Elias Whitaker. Endorsed, poorly forged, with a loopy, feminine scrawl, Marion W. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same one as before. This one was heavier. Accusatory. Judgmental. Like the walls themselves were waiting for someone to admit what they'd done. And no one did. Mr. Grayson gave me a single nod and walked back out into the cold without another word. No dramatics. No moral speech. Just the truth, left behind like a ticking bomb on the dining room table. After he left, Marian finally stood. "I needed that money," she said, shaking. "We were behind on the mortgage. On bills. You had food, didn't you? Clothes." Jacob cut in. "Come on. It wasn't like you were going to use it right. You didn't even have a bank account." Carl said nothing. Just stared at me like I was the one who had wronged them. And something inside me snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just picked up the envelope, folded it neatly, and said, "Thanks for dinner." Then I left. That was the fall. What followed wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like a movie montage where I trained in the rain or burned all my old things. It was worse. It was quiet. Cold. Lonely. The kind of fall you feel not in your bones, but in your sense of self. I went home with Claire that night. I didn't say much. She didn't press me. just made tea and left me alone on the couch, sitting in the dark with the envelope in my lap like it was radioactive. The next morning, I called my bank, asked some questions, sent over documents. The woman on the phone sounded hesitant, then concerned, then downright serious. "This is identity theft," she said plainly. "It doesn't matter if she's your mother. She endorsed checks that weren't hers. That's illegal." But I already knew that. What I didn't know was what to do next. I didn't have the energy to press charges. Not yet. I was still sorting through everything. Emotionally, financially, mentally. The weight of years of gaslighting, of being told I was lazy, of watching them give my money to Jacob, all settled on me like a second skin. And I wore it for months. I stopped calling them, blocked their numbers. Claire helped me move into a better apartment, tiny, but clean and mine. I picked up extra shifts at work. Slowly, I started saving. Properly this time. In my own name. Under my control. Claire was patient, but the silence wore on her too. We had a few arguments. She wanted me to see a therapist. I said I couldn't afford it. She offered to cover it. I said no. Pride. Stupid, stubborn pride. One night, she sat me down and said, "You're bleeding inside, Elias. And you're just letting it happen." I hated that she was right. So I went. Once. Then again. And again. It didn't fix everything. But it helped. The therapist, Lisa, was blunt, but kind. She told me what happened wasn't my fault. That I'd spent my entire youth trying to earn love that was supposed to be given freely. That I had to grieve the idea of the parents I thought I had, and accept the truth about the ones I did. That was hard, but necessary. Around that time, I also decided to file a formal report. Not to press charges immediately, but to document everything. I submitted the copies, the signatures, the bank records. The police officer I spoke with looked tired and overworked, but he paused when he read the numbers. "They took over 15 grand from you?" he asked. I nodded. "That's felony territory." I nodded again. He said I didn't have to decide right away, that the report would stay on file, that if I ever wanted to pursue it, I could. I thanked him and left. That night, I opened a folder on my laptop and named it Rebuild. Inside, I created subfolders: housing, work, therapy, bank, closure. It was stupidly symbolic, but it helped. The rise didn't come quickly. It came in inches. I found a better job. A small local startup needed someone to manage their logistics, someone organized, quiet, detail-oriented. It was like the job was written for me. It didn't pay much at first, but the founder, a woman named Erica, saw something in me. She pushed me to take on more responsibility, taught me things I didn't know I was capable of. I started learning to code in my spare time, not because I wanted to be a programmer, but because I needed to believe I could learn anything. I built a simple app to track budgeting and payments. Erica was impressed. She asked me to teach the system to her assistant, then her other employees. Within a year, I was running the operations side of the business. She gave me a small stake in the company, called me her silent hammer, quiet, but deadly efficient. Claire and I grew stronger too. We moved into a slightly bigger apartment, painted the walls ourselves, adopted a rescue cat named Junebug. She still pushed me, still challenged me, but she never forced anything, just created space for me to grow into myself. The day I turned 24, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Jacob. No return address, just a single sheet of paper. It said, "You happy now? They're falling apart. You broke, Mom." I read it once, then again. Then I folded it and tossed it in the trash. Because I didn't break anyone. They broke themselves. And if they were falling apart, maybe it was because, for the first time in their lives, someone had dared to hold up a mirror. But the real rise? That came later. Because one phone call changed everything again. It came from a law firm, a man named Gregory Rawlings. He said he was Mr. Grayson's attorney. "I don't know if you've heard," he said gently, "but Mr. Grayson passed away last week." My chest tightened. I hadn't spoken to him since the night he came to dinner. I'd always meant to. I just didn't. "I'm sorry," I said. "He was a good man." "He was," the lawyer agreed. "And he left something for you." My voice caught. "What?" "Come in. I'd rather explain in person." So I did. Mr. Grayson left me 5 acres of land, $42,000 in a separate account under my name, and a letter I still haven't fully absorbed. The land was on the edge of town, about 20 minutes from where he'd run his landscaping business. Nothing fancy, just some raw earth, trees, and a creek running through the back of the property. But it was mine. fully deeded, signed, notarized, and registered before he passed. The money had been accumulating for years in a quiet, private savings account that he'd set up himself. In case something ever happened, the lawyer explained. Apparently, Mr. Grayson had grown suspicious years ago, but didn't want to step on toes without proof. Once he saw how my parents spun stories, how they praised Jacob while claiming I refused to help or was too lazy for real work, he started putting money aside behind the scenes. I figured you'd need a clean start someday, his letter said. That part wrecked me, because even though I'd worked for him for years, even though he'd always been kind, I never realized just how much he'd seen, how much he understood. And with his passing, he'd handed me the very thing my parents had stolen, a foundation. That's when the idea started. Not all at once, but like a crack in a dam, small at first, then widening. I wasn't looking for vengeance in the traditional sense. I didn't want to see them hurt, not physically, but I wanted them to feel it. I wanted them to see me stand tall, to know they couldn't touch me anymore. And more than anything, I wanted the truth to bleed into every corner of their carefully constructed lies. I wanted everyone to know. So I began. The first step was quiet. I met with a civil attorney, Angela, recommended by Mr. Rowlings, and showed her everything. The bank records, the check copies, the forged signatures. She whistled when she saw the total amount. They cashed over 15 grand that wasn't theirs. That's not just civil theft. That's criminal fraud. I nodded. But I'm not pressing charges. Not yet. She raised an eyebrow. What's the plan then? Just keep the documents ready. I want them to sweat. I want them to know I could. Angela smiled. Cold. I like it. Step 2, the story. I wrote it all out. Not just the facts, but my experience. The gaslighting. The favoritism. The stolen money. The years of being labeled lazy while my paychecks disappeared into their grocery budget and Jacob's gas tank. I left names out, but I was specific enough that anyone from our town would recognize the players. Then I posted it anonymously on a local Facebook group, Voices of Valley Ridge. It wasn't a gossip page, but it had a wide reach. Business owners, teachers, retirees, young professionals, all in one place. Within 24 hours, the post had over 500 comments. By day 2, someone had guessed. By day 3, the guesses turned into confirmations. I remember that landscaping kid. Worked harder than anyone. Didn't Jacob get a new car right after the youngest left for college? Wait, that family. The Whitakers. Wow. I always wondered why Elias stopped coming around. I never replied. Never clarified. But I watched. By the end of the week, Marian deleted her Facebook entirely. Step 3, the event. Every year, my hometown hosts a spring festival. It's nothing extravagant, some vendors, food trucks, live music, but it's where the town's small businesses come to network and showcase what they do. Erica, my boss, had just opened a second location for our logistics company and signed up for a booth. When I told her I was from Valley Ridge, she lit up. Perfect. We'll set up there. I offered to help run it. And just like that, I had a reason to be back. Back in their space. On my terms. But I didn't just show up. I planned. I had new business cards printed. Clean design. Black and silver. My name, Elias Whitaker, in bold letters. Operations Director. I designed a banner for the booth. Set up a digital slideshow with photos of our team, our projects, and stats from the past year. The numbers looked good. Better than good. At Erica's request, we handed out flyers for a free consulting session. Sit down with our ops director and find out where your business could be saving money. People lined up. I didn't see my parents the first day, but I saw Jacob. He walked past the booth with 2 guys I recognized from high school, still stuck in the same varsity jacket mindset. He glanced at the banner, then at me. I smiled, gave him a little wave. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Day 2, Marian showed up. Not at the booth, but near the bakery stall across from us. She pretended not to notice me, but I caught the way her eyes kept flicking in my direction. She looked tired, drawn, not like the woman who used to strut around PTA meetings like she owned the school. Carl came later. Said nothing. Just stood near the edge of the crowd, watching. I didn't approach them. Not yet. Because step 4 was the fundraiser. A month before the festival, I'd gotten word through the grapevine that Marianne was planning a charity gala. Something about restoring family values in the community and supporting a local youth mentorship program. A classic image cleanse. The irony made me laugh out loud. So I made a donation. Anonymously. $1,500. Just enough to be noticeable. I listed the name of the donor as from the kid who worked. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the event organizer. She said the name intrigued her and asked if I'd like to attend as a guest of honor. I declined, but I asked if they'd be showing donor names on the big screen. She said yes. Perfect. On the night of the gala, I didn't go. I didn't need to. My contact at the local paper did. She'd been following the online buzz around my story and asked to interview me. I agreed, on one condition: anonymity. For now. The piece dropped the day after the gala. Front page of the community section. Title: What Happens When Family Fails You? A local son's story of theft, silence, and reclamation. They blurred names. But again, everyone knew. The photo was of me from behind, standing in the field Mr. Grayson left me, facing the trees. Just a silhouette. The article mentioned the gala donation, the old employer, the forgery, the betrayal. It ended with a quote from me. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm just done pretending. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing you can do. After that, the call started. Jacob texted first. You're ruining Mom. You're blowing this out of proportion. Then Carl. You're making yourself look petty. Marian didn't reach out, but a distant cousin did. You should call her. She's not doing well. I ignored them all. Then the letter came. Handwritten. Sloppy. Pages and pages. From Marianne. Some of it was apologies. Most of it was justification. We were desperate. You wouldn't have known what to do with that money. We raised you. We fed you. And then, the threat. If you don't take this article down and stop telling people lies, we'll have no choice but to sue for defamation. I scanned it. Filed it. Then I called Angela. She laughed. Defamation? That's rich. Let them try. But I didn't press charges. Not yet. Because there was still one card left to play. Something I'd been holding on to. And I was saving it for the perfect moment. A letter. Not from Mr. Grayson this time. From my old bank. An internal memo, quietly sent by a clerk who remembered my case. It stated that multiple checks deposited under Marianne's name had been flagged, but ignored due to familial relationship. They were reopening the investigation, which meant one thing. My parents were officially under audit. It happened on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic day, not a holiday, not an anniversary. Just an ordinary, unsuspecting Tuesday in late September. The kind of day that starts with a lukewarm coffee and ends with your entire world cracking wide open. If you're someone like Marianne Whitaker. But I wasn't thinking about her when I woke up. I was thinking about my team, the upcoming investor meeting, and whether or not Junebug had peed in the laundry again. Revenge wasn't even the word for what I felt anymore. It wasn't anger, or spite, or vengeance. It was execution. It was truth served cold and final, with all the mess already cleaned up. You see, the audit had wrapped, and it hadn't gone well for them. A few months earlier, after the letter from the bank clerk tipped me off, I let the wheels turn without touching them. All I'd done was quietly supply the documents, forged endorsements, misused funds, a detailed timeline of my earnings, and several testimonies. Mr. Grayson's original letter included. I hadn't followed up. I hadn't pushed. I didn't have to. Because the damage was done the moment the bank realized they'd ignored flagged behavior for years and let a minor's money be siphoned without oversight. They had to make it right. But they weren't the only ones under scrutiny. Because the IRS got involved next. Turns out, my parents never reported those deposits as income. For years. And while some banks might overlook a check signed over from a child to a parent, dozens of them, over the course of 4 years, that raised questions. Questions that came with penalties, interest, and a very specific form of professional curiosity the IRS is famous for. And then came the real blow, the civil suit. Angela, my attorney, filed it on my behalf 2 weeks after the audit findings were confirmed. We weren't just going after my parents for the stolen funds. We were going after them for defamation, emotional distress, and identity theft. Because yes, they'd taken the money. But they'd also taken my name, literally. They'd used my identity, signed in my place, spent my paychecks, and destroyed my reputation among friends and family. I wasn't interested in dragging them through court for years. I wanted a clean, sharp, and public resolution. So we gave them an offer. Full repayment of the $15,830. A formal written apology signed by both Marianne and Carl. And a signed statement clearing my name, acknowledging that all accusations of laziness or refusing to work had been lies. If they refused, We'd move forward with the lawsuit and release the legal findings to every local outlet that had covered the anonymous story earlier that year. They didn't respond at first, but then Tuesday happened. The knock came at 8:12 a.m. I was sipping coffee when I saw the envelope slide under my apartment door, hand-delivered, no postage. Thick cream paper, a little worn at the corners. I let it sit for a second before picking it up. No need to rush the inevitable. Inside were 2 documents. The first, a signed confession, complete with notarized signatures, a bank-issued verification form, and a breakdown of the misappropriated funds. The second, a letter, not from a lawyer, not from Carl, from Marianne, handwritten, just like the last one, but this one was different. It wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was pathetic. I don't know how we became these people. I told myself it was just one check. Then another. Then we needed groceries. Then Jacob needed tires. And the lies just got easier. I thought you'd never find out. I thought we were protecting you. I know you won't forgive us. But I hope someday you'll forget enough to be free. She ended it with her name. Just her name. No love, Mom. No sign-off. And I sat with that for a long time. The fallout hit them harder than I imagined. Their house. Listed within 3 weeks. I don't know if it was to pay the fine, or to downsize, or because they just couldn't handle the whispers anymore. Either way, it went up with the photos carefully staged to hide the wear and tear. Jacob's car? Repossessed. Turns out he defaulted on the new one too. I heard from a mutual friend that Carl was seen working part-time at a warehouse outside town. A man who once barked about lazy kids who don't know what hard work is, now packing boxes overnight. As for Marianne, she vanished from every social platform, resigned from her charity board, stopped showing up to her church. The same woman who once told me I had no drive was now quietly erased from the very community she spent years trying to impress. And me? I bought a cabin. Not a big one, just 2 bedrooms and a wraparound porch, but it sat right in the middle of the 5 acres Mr. Grayson left me. I built it with a local crew, paid them well, even brought them sandwiches on the hot days. They thought I was just some lucky startup guy, but the truth was simpler. I was free. Free from their expectations. Free from the lies. Free from the long shadow of people who never saw me as anything but a tool. Claire and I still lived in town during the week, but every Friday night, we drove to the cabin, sat under the stars with Junebug curled in her lap, listening to the creek and the wind and the kind of silence that only comes after you've cut the noise out of your life. Angela called me a few weeks after the dust settled, asked how I was doing. I told her the truth. I feel lighter. She laughed. You ever think you'd get to this place? No, I said. But I earned it. Because I did. Every damn inch of it. And the best part? I never yelled. Never lost my temper. Never begged. I just outgrew them. Outworked them. Outlived their lies. And made sure they watched every step of my rise.